Good morning. Who knows how long the Gettysburg Address was? Either length of time or number of words? Go on, random guesses. Very short, somebody's saying.
2 minutes.
A few more guesses?
10 minutes.
Okay, top of the class. 278 words, 2 minutes. Incredible, isn't it? One of the most talked about, one of the most influential presentations, for that is what it was, in history, and it was only 2 minutes, 278 words. There is a man who knew about brevity and clarity and concisity, that's not a word, being concise. And the funny thing about that is that because the norms of the day were that people would speak for 2 hours, there's no photographic record of him making that speech because the photographers were unloading the van, so to speak. I'm going to endeavour to follow in his footsteps and condense what I would normally spend about 6 hours sharing with probably a smaller group than this, and I'm going to try to condense all of that into 1 hour and 10 minutes, which actually is a really interesting exercise. So I'm going to give you what I'm calling the jus. You know, that stuff that's left in the bottom of the pan when you boil off all the alcohol. I don't know why I use that analogy. I've never made jus. I don't know how to do it. Maybe some of you have, but I like the word. So the jus, I've selected these 5 areas: preparation, content, structure, dementors. That's PowerPoint, for that is what PowerPoint is turning into dementors, because it sucks the life and soul out of most presentations and performance, of course. And my objective in this short session is that you leave this room doing something, possibly even several things, differently. And of course, by different, I mean better. Because this session is about helping you to establish new habits and possibly break some old habits that will enable you to become a more effective and a more confident and engaging presenter stroke communicator. And let's use the word presenter for the sake of this morning, even though actually what we mean is communicator in the broadest sense, because one of the things I'd really like you to take away from today is that you'll never think that you're going to an informal cup of coffee with a client ever again, because it's not informal. It's an opportunity for you as a communicator to shine. And I would encourage you to apply just a little bit more rigor to your preparation, even if it's only 2 minutes in the taxi on the way there, to those what you had considered to be informal situations. So why these 5? And what do I know about it anyway? Let me spend 2 minutes telling you about my background and experience, because it's that shapes and informs my approach to this training. So as Camilla said, we met 150 years ago at Val and Pollen, so I started my working life in agencies, like many of you. I was a suit, or a twin set, as we used to call it in the 80s. And then I moved to Wolf Olins and spent a couple of years working in corporate print and corporate identity. And then I threw all of that in and pursued my desire, my need to perform. And I went to the BBC and became a voiceover, so a continuity announcer, one of those people who pops up in between the programmes and says, now on BBC One EastEnders, or ideally something a bit more creative than that. But anyway, did that for about 8 years, and then went in front of the camera and presented business news on BBC World. Did a whole lot of presenting series for various BBC channels, and corporate work and live events. And I've been freelance now for about 17 years, doing still a combination of all of those things. So voiceovers, presenting, and facilitating live events. And for 20 years, I've been helping other people to improve their communication skills. Lawyers, diplomats, financial services, Olympic superstars, a little bit more about them later, and increasingly actually agency people. And the reason that I'm telling you that is that everything I'm going to share with you this morning is based on actual experience, 23, I must stop talking about all these years, dates, 23 years, day in, day out, working in front of a camera or a microphone or an audience. So this is not some sort of management consultancy babble that you could get from a manual that you could buy on Amazon. This is about process, and it's all based on my real experience and the habits that I've developed over those 23 years that I'd like to share with you. So let me ask you a very simple question to begin. Is being a good presenter a gift or a skill? Gift? Both? Skill? Bit of both? Anybody else? Whole range of responses. I know with absolute certainty that it is a skill that can be acquired. And I think a lot of people hide behind the idea that it's a gift because it means they don't have to try to be any better. I think it's a bit like skiing. Any fool can put on a pair of skis and get down a slope, and you can carry on getting down a slope for 20 years. But if you want to do those beautiful, not that I can do them, parallel carved turns, you get a lesson. Why would you not? But those of you who said a bit of both are also entirely right, because it's not a level playing field. There are some people who are born with natural gifts and qualities and personality traits that are always going to give them an advantage. And there's that thing called charisma, which we can't learn and can't be taught, I believe. But what this is about you being the very best that you can be while remaining authentic to your personality and your style of presenting. This is not about acting. I'm not the greatest presenter in the world, but I think I'm the best I can be. And that's what I want to encourage you to think about this morning. And it's worth saying that you are all absolutely perfect as you are. All we need to do is buff you up slightly around the edges. I want to begin by spending a couple of minutes thinking about your personal brand. In exactly the same way that you might work with your clients, helping them to articulate their brand values, it's very useful for you as individuals to go through a similar process. And what I'm getting at here is, what kind of communicator, what kind of presenter do you aspire to being? What are the actual words that you would like somebody who saw you present and then they're down the pub that night and they're telling their mate, oh, I saw that Peter present today, he was really good, he was... What are those words? So can you each spend literally a couple of minutes thinking about it and then jotting down a few words? You only need to be thinking about 2 or 3 words maybe. And the kinds of words that other people have used over the years might be passionate, expert, believable, friendly, authoritative, a whole range of different words. And the reason this is useful is that it's a benchmark for you. Now, if we were doing a proper session together, I would be getting you to do that hideous thing of presenting a short piece, and I'd be filming it and we'd watch it back, which is, of course, completely hideous. And everybody hates it. But at the end of the session, they always say, that was hideous, but I can see that it was really useful. Because it's so interesting how often people watch themselves and realise that what they're projecting is not what they feel inside. And usually for the better. Usually they think it's all bad and actually they see it and it's really good. But what we're able to do then as we're watching it back is say, right, is this whatever your brand values are? And if it's not, what do we need to change to improve it? So who's got a few words? Just let's chuck out a few of your aspired brand values.
Engaging.
Engaging. Ah, yes, excellent. Yep, very good.
Inspiring.
Yep. Oh, yes, like that.
Slick.
Ooh, now that's an interesting word. That's very interesting. Well, slick. Is slick what we want to be? I wonder if slick has become a negative word because, you know, following the sort of Tony Blair school of it's all very, very polished, but actually what is he saying, and do we actually remember any of it? I wonder about that. My sense is that actually what people are aspiring to these days is being a bit, I talked about buffing you up, but being a little bit more conversational and a bit rougher around the edges and a little bit more real, speaking in a human way, rather than delivering a very slick presentation. So, Camilla, I'm really sorry, you're not allowed to be slick. Does anybody agree with that? Do we agree that actually slick can be a bad thing? What else are we going for?
Self-assured.
Oh, yes, I like that. Assured is a fantastic word. I really like that. Because assured gives your audience confidence that you know what you're doing, you know where you are in the presentation. It makes them feel secure.
Honest.
Honest, fantastic, yeah. And you know, I think in this, I mean, I know you're all from different, slightly different sectors, but I think certainly in the PR world that I came from, I think there can be cynicism about us as individuals and what we're peddling, and I think honest is a really brilliant brand value to aspire to. Any more?
Knowledgeable.
Knowledgeable, yeah, fantastic. I think that combination of demonstrating that you really know your stuff and you've got a lot of experience and you're honest and you're energetic is really, really powerful. So maybe you'll want to spend a couple more minutes thinking about those another time, and then obviously have them tattooed on your inner thigh or forearm. And then when you're presenting, you can keep looking at them and making sure that you're living them. The other reason that it's useful to have done this exercise is that when you're putting together a pitch team, and a bit later on I'm going to talk about music and rhythm within a presentation, very useful to think about the individuals and what order they're going in, because you don't necessarily want to have two speakers back to back who have very similar brand values, particularly if those brand values are maybe gentle and, you know, unobtrusive and whatever, because you want to try and build some variety into your pitch. Okay, let's go for the beginning of the jeu and talk about preparation. And I have a prop, because I like props. Abraham Lincoln said, if you have 8 hours to cut down a tree, spend 6 hours sharpening the axe. I know that's not an axe, but do you know what? I don't really want to walk around London carrying an axe. So it's an implement that cuts wood. So forgive me that it's not absolutely accurate. 8 hours to cut down the tree, 6 hours to sharpen the axe. That's what I would like you to go away remembering today. It takes a long time to prepare a really good presentation. And some very eminent people agree with that. So Jobs, this book is really excellent actually, I'm in the middle of reading it, made no bones about how long he spent preparing, dozens and dozens and dozens of hours preparing the content and the slides and rehearsing. You know that Inconvenient Truth, Al Gore's Inconvenient Truth, the presentation, not the movie. Apparently that took 90 hours to prepare that presentation. So let's dispel immediately this idea that anybody stands up and gives a brilliant presentation off the cuff, because it just does not happen. And you know, you learn so much in the training room, don't you? I was working with somebody the other day and he said, yes, I was in the loo the other day just before a presentation, and my boss was there and he was pacing up and down and, you know, rehearsing his opening and so on. He said, and I was absolutely gobsmacked because I'd always thought that he was one of those people who can just stand up and do it. And that was a brilliant moment for him to realise that real human beings do not just do it off the cuff. Somebody said to me the other day, I want to be like those stand-up comedians who just you know, stand up and ad lib. And I nearly fell off my chair, because I believe those presentations, because that's what they are the most finely tuned and rehearsed and tweaked and tested and edited presentations of all, and yet they give that wonderful, don't they? They create the impression that I've just thought of that on the way here. So, and somebody actually in another session the other day said jazz. I don't know anything about jazz. He said, jazz appears to be very sort of loose and ad-libbed and so on, and it's not. So let's all agree, let's make a pact today that we know you have to put the time and the discipline into preparing and that we're going to try to do that. I know, of course, that time is your enemy, but as we go along, let's think about how you might spend the 2 minutes that you've been given to prepare, or the 10 minutes that you've been given to prepare, or the 90 hours that you might be given to prepare. Preparation gives you the first of my favourite C words, control. And it's control that leads to confidence. Let's do a little bit more demystification of that word confidence, because a little bit like gift or skill, I think some people hide behind that. Oh, I'm not a confident speaker, therefore I don't need to try to be any better or to improve. I know for certain that you can create confidence, that you can learn to be more confident, that you can put in place habits that will give you confidence. And I know this from the really interesting work that I've been doing with these Olympic superstars. So swimmers, canoeists, Olympic gold medalists, amazing people, fantastic to be in the room with them. And one in particular, of course, Chris Hoy. And we were doing some work together, and I asked him about confidence and so on. And he told me all about the work that Dave Brailsford did with the British cycling team. And then, of course, Team Sky, and he's now trying his hand at the English football team. Slightly bigger challenge there, I think. Who's heard of Dave Brailsford's aggregation of marginal gains? Everybody? Yeah, okay, fantastic. Or if you haven't, simply put, it's attention to detail, isn't it? So what he does is he unpicked the cycling team. So you've got the bike, and within the bike you've got the wheels and the handlebars and whatever. Do you remember the French accused us of having rounder wheels than the Agincourt all over again? And there's nutrition, obviously, and what they wear. There's mental strength, lifestyle, training. So he unpicks every element of, in cycling's case, that team, and improves it by a tiny margin, 1%, let's say. But if you improve every element by 1%, that's the difference between bronze and gold. And it works. And I would like to propose that we can do the same thing with our presentations. We can unpick every element and make sure that we've controlled what we can control, and we've improved them by a tiny margin. Let me give you a real example of that from my own work. I was facilitating a live event. In rehearsal, I noticed that the step up to the stage was really high, a bit awkward, a bit unwieldy. And I thought, ooh, I might trip, just might look a bit awkward. So I asked the crew to put a box there. Very simple, 2 little steps instead of 1 big one. Tiny, tiny marginal gain, but it just made the difference between me stepping up on stage in a confident mood and therefore communicating confidence, and being a little bit anxious that I was going to trip. And an example from Hoy and the other people in the cycling team is they travel with their own pillows in order that they never have a bad night's sleep on a strange hotel pillow. So the conclusion from this is that confidence can become a habit if you prepare meticulously. And I'm so interested in this, and obviously it all leads on from these various Olympic superstars that I've been working with. But I've started to ask other very successful people what gives them confidence. And I don't lead them, I just say what gives you confidence. 2 that I think are of interest. One is a High Court judge, very young woman High Court judge, brilliant lawyer, among her peers, highly respected. And I certainly didn't ask her a leading question. I said, what gives you confidence? And she said, she calls it the extra, unnecessary half hour. So at the end of the prep that she knows she needs to do, she always does an extra half hour, because she knows that that gives her the edge. She didn't say anything about, oh, well, I was born confident and I'm just, it's just something I have innately. And somebody else I know is a a polar explorer. She's led expeditions to the North and South Poles, as you do, not in the same trip. And same question to her. And she said, planning, to have a plan, and to control the things that you can control, and plan for the things that you can't. And you know, that's really interesting in the context of particularly pitch presentations, because people often say to me, oh, what if we get derailed? What if they ask difficult questions? That's where you're planning for the things you can't control. That's where you're rehearsing what the most difficult question might be. Thinking about what if they want to know about the thing that we were going to do at the end? How do we then regroup? You can't control it, but you can plan for it. So the question is, how do we prepare effectively and efficiently, time being our enemy? So just throw into the pot where you might begin your preparation for a big presentation. Is it the deck? Is it what you're going to wear? Is it content? Where do you currently begin? Deck? Yes, yes. Let's take it as read that you have got the answer to the brief. You've got the creative solution, for example, and now we're just thinking about how you're going to communicate that. So we've got deck. What else? Oh, go to the top of the class. If we had longer, we'd have spent ages sort of going all around the houses to get to that, but actually that's fantastic. Fast forwarded. Yes, I even have a prop for audience, because audiences eat popcorn. Yes, I would suggest, tell me if you disagree, that every piece of communication begins with the audience. Because unless you know who you're speaking to, how do you know what will engage, persuade, resonate? And I had an example of this the other day, actually. I had to write a condolence letter. And as I started to write, I thought, oh my gosh, this is a real example of beginning with the audience, because I had to think about my relationship with him, his relationship with his father, his emotional landscape, if you like, in order that my tone and my language was appropriate for him. And if you still need convincing, if I said to you, now, I'm going to a thing tonight and I need a joke, could somebody please give me a really, really good joke? I hope your next question would be, well, who's it for? Is it for the rugby club or your 9-year-old daughter's school class? Because they do really filthy jokes at school. You get my point. Are we all convinced that it should begin with the audience? Very often people say, oh, content, because they want to quickly get into, what do I know? Just tell them everything I know. Lawyers are particularly bad at this. I know from there to there about this subject, so I'll just do all of that. And then I can't be accused of missing anything out. So what questions do we ask ourselves, even if we've only got 2 minutes, about the audience? Who are they? Some very practical things. Who are they? What do they know? What level of seniority? What's their particular area of expertise? What do they know about me as an individual? What do they know about my agency? All these questions need answers before you start thinking about your content. So that's all the factual stuff. But obviously there's also an emotional element to all of this. What are they feeling, these people in the room? Are they cynical? Are they anxious? Are they hostile? If it's a pitch situation, are they batting for another agency? Are they hostile to us? Are they hopeful? Are they fearful that you're going to undermine what they do if they're in the comms area? Are they fearful that there's going to be conflict? It's really worth spending a few minutes mapping out the emotional landscape, if you like, of the people in front of you. And of course, it's also worth remembering that they're individuals. I think too often we just think, oh, we're seeing Company X. Let's go on the website and look at the latest news report, and then we know everything about Company X. But these are individuals, and they've all got their own emotional landscape. And you're taking them all on a journey, an emotional journey. Simply put, in a pitch situation, the journey is this. At the beginning, you need them. At the end, they need you. And you need to map out how you're going to reach and resonate and connect with each of those individuals. This, of course, is audience segmentation, as we all know it in our work. And there's a really fantastic example of this, which we will send you. We'll send you a link to this clip. It's very short. And it was Reagan on the night of the shuttle disaster. And he gave an address to the nation. And it's completely seamless and very elegantly done. But when you're looking for it, you can see that he had a number of different audiences in mind, 5 or 6 different groups, to which he had to deliver different messages. So he had the families of the dead people, school children, because if you remember, one of the astronauts was a teacher. So every school child in the States was watching this disaster live. He had messages for NASA, he had messages for Congress, a message for the Russians, and obviously for the American public in general. And he does it absolutely brilliantly. So when we send you that link, have a look at it. It's very, very short, and you'll see that audience segmentation in action. So let's move on to the second element of our jeu, content. And my rather gross prop for content is this. It's a plastic turd. The PR adage, of course, that you can't polish a turd. That's really important. Sorry, but you what?
You can have a good go.
And I usually, in our normal session, I use it in conjunction with these are brand new, there's a label, pair of knickers, because that illustrates how important the juxtaposition of content and performance is. Too often, I think, in this sort of training, people focus exclusively on performance. You can actually be quite a good performer, but if your content is not absolutely relevant to those people on that day in front of you, that is a poor piece of communication. They have to work hand in hand. They're like ant and deck. They don't work separately. So, 4 things. That was 5. 4 things I'd like to share with you about content. And the first one I call 15 seconds through the letterbox. So imagine this. Got your preparation all planned, your pitch perhaps. You arrive at the room, they're all inside. The door's locked and you can't get in. You're never going to be able to get in. But there is a letterbox and you can lift the flap and you're allowed to shout through for 15 seconds only. So you have to communicate in 15 seconds the essence of what you would have spent an hour communicating with them. And if you can't do that, if you can't condense your hour-long presentation into 15 seconds, that would suggest that you haven't got true clarity of thought. This is hard, but it's a really good discipline. It's a really good habit to get into, that one member of your team or you yourself says, what's our 15 seconds through the letterbox? What is going to win this business for us? What's the one thing that we could say instead of all that other stuff and all those slides that would engage and persuade that audience? The second thing I want to share with you, I call the raised eyebrow moment. At some point in your presentation, the full one now, not the 15 seconds, it is great if your audience does this. Possibly even with that little noise. The noise is an added extra, but certainly we want the eyebrows raised. And they do that because you've told them, shown them, done something, waved something in the air at them that has engaged or surprised them. And I would encourage you to be a little bit more systematic when you're planning your content and actually say, just as you're going to do what's our 15 seconds through the letterbox, where are our raised eyebrow moments, or where is our one raised eyebrow moment? Let me give you an example of a fantastic one. Bill Gates was presenting to the great and the good about his malaria. You may have seen this. I think it was TED, about his malaria project. And halfway through the presentation, he picked up a jar, unscrewed it, and released a whole lot of mosquitoes into the audience. And he said, why should poor people be the only ones to get close to mosquitoes? Now, that was a raised eyebrow, and I think there were gasps of horror, not even that little noise. Okay, it's a very extreme example. You're probably never going to be able to do anything quite so melodramatic, but you can do something that will make them go, Third tip to share with you about content Stories. Oh my goodness, how many man hours are spent on courses about storytelling? I mean, you could spend your whole life going from one course to another about storytelling. That's because it's actually very important, but it's also very simple. It's about enlivening your material. It's about making it real. So don't talk to me in abstract terms, for example, about thought leadership. Tell me what it looks like. Refer to an example that you heard on the Today programme this morning on the way in, or something you saw in the paper yesterday that your audience will have seen. Bring everything to life with real examples and human stories, if you possibly can. Because stories speak to the emotions. And we know, don't we, in our world, in all of your businesses, we know that emotion is really important. We know that emotion reaches people in a way that fact does not. Okay, why do we cry at the John Lewis ad? Perhaps it's only me that cries at the John Lewis ad, but I do every time. You know that Only a Woman, which starts with the crawling baby. I cry every single time. That's not because their toasters have a really good mechanism. That's because they've reached my emotions. And you know, Aristotle, a little while back, about the time that we were at Vallenpollen, I think, said, persuasion may come when the speech stirs their emotions. We've always known this. It's a very human thing. So balance your factual content with emotion, with stories, with examples. But do make sure that you get the balance right. Because remember, back to our audience segmentation, you might have somebody there who's interested in finance. He or she might respond better to the factual stuff. You might have somebody who's marketing or comms who might respond better to the emotional stuff. Plan your audience and make sure that you're giving them enough of the content that will reach them as individuals. Okay, fourth area to think about in content is editing. How hard is it to be concise? Back to Gettysburg. How many words, Gettysburg? Who can remember? 278, yeah. It's way harder to be concise, isn't it, than verbose. George Bernard Shaw wrote a letter to Lady Tiddlypush thanking her for something, and he said, "I'm sorry to be writing a letter. I didn't have time to write a postcard." Why are all these advertising copywriters paid all that money? It's hard, but you need to get into the habit of being able to edit your own material. Please don't present an hour's worth of content in half an hour by just speaking quicker. Get in with your red pen and lose half of that content. And of course, your audience planning at the beginning of the process will help, because you can keep going back and testing, is this relevant? Is this relevant to those people on that day, in that mood, with what's going on in their company and with the economy and, you know, the global horizon? So please, please, please get comfortable with the idea of editing your material. I like to think of it as your fantastic content is a fillet steak. Too many words covers it in gravy. So please don't serve a fillet steak covered in gravy. Just go for the beautiful, tasty steak. Let's move on to think about structure. Why is structure important? Who is it who, did you say assured? Yeah, you want to be assured. That's such a brilliant word. Structure is important because it makes your audience feel secure and it gives them clarity. And it's a bit like, you know, when you're in a car and somebody else is driving and they're a good driver, and you have that sense of well-being because you feel like you're in safe hands. And of course, conversely, if they're not, you're slightly on edge. We want our audience to feel that they're in safe hands because you're in control. And working on really good structure will help you to achieve that. It gives you control over the material and it gives you control over your delivery. No structure looks like a stream of consciousness. Now we're back to our lawyers who know from there to there and just do it all. And we've all sat through stream of consciousness and it's painful, isn't it? Because you see, I mentioned earlier the idea of music. Every presentation is like a piece of music. It has a rhythm and a pulse naturally. You've got to decide whether yours is going to be Muzak or Mozart. Now, we're getting into quite sophisticated territory here, and we could spend a whole session looking at structure and music and looking at the sonata form and how we could mirror that. Let's not do that, but let's plant in your mind the idea that you might look at your presentation, your individual presentation or your entire pitch, as a piece of music, and think about where the loud bits are and the quieter bits, and where you're repeating an idea or a phrase. And of course, within the overall pitch presentation, you've got the individual the movements, that's each individual, and within that you've got music, loud bits and quiet bits. And it's all about variety. And some of it might be to do with movement, so maybe halfway through the presentation you're going to move somewhere to try to get some more energy back into the presentation. But if you can at least go away thinking about your presentations as music, I think that will be a really good start. Two other things I want to share with you about structure. One is openings and closings. How many people here have ever opened in a similar way? Hello, my name's Jane. Thanks for inviting me in to talk today. Really good to be here. Bit of an early start, sorry about that. I'm going to very briefly, just a quick trot through some of the stuff that might help you. Who's done that ever? I used to. And who's ended like this? Well, that's, I think, is that it? Yeah, great, that's it. We're out of time, I'm afraid, sorry about that, bit of a rush. Anybody got any questions? Who's done that? We've certainly all sat through those. Please, 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 never do that again, because the opening and the close are such important opportunities for you to shine in slightly different ways. The opening is an opportunity to establish your brand values and your credentials, and possibly to engage. Could be even a raised eyebrow right at the very beginning. Might even be your 15 seconds through the letterbox. But please spend a little bit more time thinking about the opening. Okay, if you've got 2 minutes in the taxi, you're going to do 15 seconds through the letterbox and audience. If you've got 10 minutes, you're going to do 15 seconds audience and an opening and a closing. The closing is important because we know that they remember that more than anything else you've said. So that's an opportunity to reinforce your key message. It could be a call to action. It could be reinforcing your brand values again. Could be the raised eyebrow. Could be an amazing visual that they're going to remember all the way through the next agency's presentation. But please think about it a little bit more and rehearse them. We may have time to talk about rehearsal later, I'm not sure. The final thing that I want to share with you about structure is the concept of chapters. So, your presentation is a piece of music. It's also like a book. Now, working in chapters, thinking about your material as self-contained chapters, each idea is a self-contained chapter, really helps you to structure, helps you to edit, because you can just get rid of whole chapters. This is how I started my preparation for this morning. Very high tech. These are chapter headings, and then with the examples that I wanted to use. You probably use something more high tech. In fact, JFDI have got some brilliant large post-it notes on your tables, which would be very useful to have up on your wall as individual chapters. But it gives you great flexibility with the material. What it also does, though, is something hugely, hugely important for the audience. And I came across this the other day on the tube. So I was sitting opposite a woman. I could see that she was reading. She came to the end of a chapter, and I could see it. And she did this. And she carried on. And I went, I didn't go, I would have been arrested. But I thought, I've got to tell people about that. Because what she needed was a moment to absorb and reflect and analyse what she'd just read before she was ready to move on to the next bit of content. You are that book. They can't look up from it. You have to give them those moments. And by beginning to think about your content in terms of chapters, that will force you. We're talking now about pauses, and we're talking about silence, the thing that everybody fears, but it will force you to give them those moments to look up from the book. Eye contact, doing really good eye contact is going to help you with that as well, because you're looking into somebody's eyes and thinking, ooh, did you get that? Before you move on to somebody else. So please, please, please start thinking about your content and working and maneuvering your content in terms of chapters. We've arrived at the Dementors. Do people agree with me that PowerPoint sucks the life force out of many an otherwise good presentation? It's a disaster, isn't it? It really is a disaster area. And I sometimes laugh that companies bring me in to help their people to be better face-to-face communicators, that fantastic thing that is looking into another human being's eyes and telling them something that is hopefully engaging. They bring me in to help people do that better, and then they make them basically stand behind a screen. It's really interesting. I mean, why it's happening is interesting in itself. But the fundamental problems, I think, are twofold. One is that PowerPoint is coming into the equation too soon. So we talked earlier, didn't we, about 8 hours and 6 hours. It seems to me that PowerPoint's coming into the equation at about 59 minutes in, and it should be 5 hours, 59 minutes in. And it's starting to drive the content. So I worked with a PR agency the other day, and I queried why they'd got a credentials slide so early on. Because if we think about the audience, they know already a lot about your agency. They've asked you to come in. They've probably seen documents. They've probably met you. There might have been a chemistry meeting. Why do you need to tell them about the company history again, so early on in the presentation? You could bring that in or weave it in later. Anyway, so I challenged them about this, and they said, oh yeah, but it's in the deck there. That's not unusual, is it? That the deck is driving the content and the order, and that is a disaster. It's a bit like putting wallpaper on an unplastered wall. You know, back to our fillet steak analogy. Your PowerPoint is a side salad. It's not the main course. So it's coming into the equation too soon. I think the other disaster area is the amount of content that people are putting on the slides. What it seems to me people are doing is creating a document or a report, which is great, fantastic documents and reports, and then projecting them, and then reading them out. So why are you there? You could just hand that out and go and watch a film. So I think people are using it badly. And even when they try to, again, I worked with an agency the other day and they said, no, we've cut down the number of slides. We used to do 60, now we do 30. But it's the same content, just crammed into 30 slides. So I think this is where your confidence in editing your material, but also the slides, will come into play. And for many organisations, this is a really big thing. Somebody else said to me the other day, how else are we going to demonstrate that we've done a lot of work? Wow, that's an interesting thought. One solution often is to have two versions. So you produce the report or the document, which you then leave behind, but you certainly don't hand it out at the beginning, because then they're just going to go through it. Leave that behind if you think that's going to demonstrate that you've done all the work, but then produce a second version, which is the one that you project and talk to. But I think there's a lot of work to do on content. The other problem, of course, is that it's a physical barrier. It's the third member in the marriage, isn't it? Because, you know, it's kind of you, me, and oh yes, and now I'm going to talk about this, and I've got my back to you, and I'm, you know, sideways on, rather than that lovely face-to-face, intense, into the eyes thing. There really are only several reasons why anything should be on a slide. One is impact or recall. So when Steve Jobs launched the iPhone, They wanted the media to print Apple reinvents the phone, which of course they duly did. And so they used that phrase, which they'd probably spent more than 90 hours coming up with, as a visual several times during that presentation, and he also said it several times. So it was a brilliant way of reinforcing the 15 seconds through the letterbox. So recall and impact, hugely important. Also for structure. So we're talking again about our good driver. We're talking about making the audience feel safe and assured that they know where you are. So it might be, I'm going to talk about 4 things, the usual kind of punctuation slides, which are helpful to the audience. And the third reason is clarification. So let's say you've got something that is very difficult to articulate, a company structure, for example, that you can show graphically, and it's going to really simplify it. That's another good reason for having a slide. Otherwise, it shouldn't be there. And certainly, if you've got paragraphs, full paragraphs or even sentences on there, what do you think the audience is doing? They're reading, and if they're reading, they're not listening. So for the whole time that they're reading that, you may as well be silent, because they're not engaged with you. And the reason that this, I think, is so important is that a lot of people say to me, agencies, oh, well, in a pitch of 4, we practically know all the same, if it's PR, journalists, we practically offer the same services. There's very little difference between us. So what is the difference? Well, it's the human beings. It's those individuals, it's the personality, it's the rapport, it's the connection. And that's being destroyed because they're too wedded to the slides. And so we arrive at performance. So we're in the room now. Let's think back to what I said earlier about being authentic. This is not about acting, but it is a performance, because there is a difference between the you that is in the cab chatting to your colleague on the way to the presentation and the you that is in the spotlight, shining as a communicator. And the image that I'd like to suggest to you is, when a cat gets a bit agitated and it slightly puffs itself up, and particularly its tail gets bigger. It's the same cat, but it's slightly bigger. That's what I'd like to encourage you to be, big cat. And I want us to practice now, for a few minutes, being big cat. So I'm going to demonstrate. I want you to stay where you are, and around each table, all at the same time, I want you to do a transition. So I'm going to do it now. So I'm going to turn into small cat. So this is me now just chatting to you, and I'm being small cat. And what I want each of you to experience is what it feels like to transition from small cat to big cat. Now, when I turn into big cat, obviously I've stood up, and very often you'll be sitting down. But it's very often about volume, might be about pace. I think my eye contact becomes a little bit more deliberate. I think my hand gestures become slower. And I think there's a sort of intensity about my delivery when I'm being big cat. You're all individuals, your big cat will look slightly different. So let's spend now a few minutes, each of you go around the table, and each of you do the transition from small cat to big cat. And some of it might be body language. In fact, when you're sitting down, it very often is about moving into the table, maybe putting the shoulders back, better posture, sitting on the edge of the seat. That's another really good thing, because you're then forced to have better posture. So just each table now do, please, transition from small to big.
Small cat. And then especially when I get really passionate about something, I'll be like, yes, and then, yeah.
Your shoulders went back a bit then when you became big cat, actually. Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, I'm always saying, right, let's do
But I think that's quite interesting, the fact that some people are naturally quite big cats,
Yeah.
and some people are quite small cats. And we're just saying that some people we can't tell much difference.
Yes, no, that's absolutely right. Often the case, and and those people probably need to work a little bit more on forcing it a bit, projecting a little bit more, probably. And posture's a great one, actually. And the sitting down thing, sitting right on the end, rather than sitting full back, sitting on the end, the front of your seat, really helps because it makes you lean in. Yeah. Yeah, and it helps you often if say you're around a table with a lot of very forceful people. And this is often the case with women who have difficulty breaking in to a conversation and getting their points across when there are a lot of shouty men in the room. If you're physically, over the table, you can get your hand in and do the, oh, Peter, can I just come in with a point about that, rather than sitting back and being out of the loop, as it were. We done? Okay. Meow. Are we done? Has everybody experienced it? Who found that difficult? Who did not naturally do the transition? Why did you find that difficult? Ah, okay. Do it now then, just to add to the self-consciousness. Let's all see it, small to big. Now small, yeah? Yeah. Yeah. That is such an important difference. You look far more assured there with that body language. And did you up your volume a little bit as well? Were you able to?
Probably.
I won't make you do that now. Yeah. But most of us experienced the moment of transition, did we? Jayne Torville, I saw her interviewed the other day, and her moment of transition was really interesting. It was when she takes her tracksuit top off, not when she gets on the ice. You'd imagine that you go on the ice and the lights are on, but that was her trigger. And I think we each need a trigger that makes us puff up to become big cat. Body language, so we started to talk about body language there. How many of you have to present standing up sometimes? Is that nearly everybody? Yeah. So we have then the problem of what to do with our body. And it's hard, isn't it? Really, really difficult. And I would like to propose that we have a resting position, a neutral position that we come back to again and again, and that we all get comfortable standing in this position. And this is the neutral position. It's legs hip distance apart, weight evenly distributed, shoulders slightly back, because that helps with breathing, and arms down and relaxed. Now, if we were being really tough, we'd go for arms literally hanging at our sides. That's too hard. The great thing about having either cue cards or a clicker is it gives you something to cup. If you haven't got that, I think, which is rare, then it's, what do we do with these? This is not good, obviously, but just slightly touching each other is fine. Might we all just do that very, very briefly? Can we all stand up and do the resting position, the neutral position? So, legs hip distance apart, shoulders back, weight absolutely evenly distributed. And let's try with arms down by our sides, just to feel how terrible that is. That's so awkward, isn't it? And don't we feel exposed? Horrible. So let's be kind to ourselves and go for the... And it should be below the waist, because if you're doing this, it's a distraction. What we're trying to do is get rid of all distractions, basically. So if we're comfortable that we have a resting position, we can then move from that, and we can use choreography as part of our presentation. Are we all happy that we've got that sussed? Yes? Weight evenly distributed there? Yes, I thought you were. Yeah? Okay, so remember that position. That's where you should be at rest. Please sit. But remember to use choreography, use movement. You know, we talked earlier about contrast, the music, light and shade, and loud and soft. You can use handing something out, showing a prop, moving from one side of the stage to the other. I worked with a guy the other day who was doing a TED talk, massive stage, they're really hard. And we built in moments when he was deliberately going to walk to the other side of the stage to up the energy in his presentation and take the audience along with him. So we've done the body. Let's think about eye contact. Why is eye contact important?
Engaging.
Yep.
This is where we receive all our information about other people.
Yep.
Calms you down when you're presenting.
Oh, that's interesting. Calms you down. Some people think the opposite.
Yeah, well, I use it because it's easy to talk one-to-one with someone.
Yeah.
But when you're presenting, if you go around and you look at someone and you look at someone else, then
Yeah.
it's like you're presenting one-to-one.
Yeah, very good. Very good point.
Look for a friendly threat.
Ah,
It's
yes.
not hostile.
For sure. Yeah, all of that is absolutely right. There's another reason, which again, brilliantly, I learned in the training room, because somebody came to me and said, I need you to make my voice deeper. Well, I thought, A, I can't do that in one session. I know Mrs. Thatcher did. And B, I bet that's not the issue. And this person was getting terrible feedback. She was on a series of events, a roadshow, delivering the same content with a group of others. Anyway, cut a long story short, she did her presentation, I filmed it, and it was really weird because in normal conversation, small cap, her intonation was quite musical, it's quite varied, and yet in this presentation, it was completely flat. I couldn't figure out why there'd been a change. I realised that it was because of poor eye contact. So what she was doing, interesting what you say, because she was terribly, terribly anxious, she was doing, I know that I've got to do eye contact and I've got to include everybody in the room because that's what I learned on that course. And I'm including everybody, and look, I'm doing really good eye contact because I've been on that course and I know that I'm supposed to do this. She wasn't actually looking in anybody's eyes. And the impact that had on her intonation and her pace was to completely flatten it. So what happens when you look into people's eyes is that you slow down, you build in natural pauses where you're doing, she got that? And you're making a real connection with another human being. And it's the difference between delivering a presentation and telling people something. And I would really love you to take away from today that difference. Don't deliver a presentation, don't give a presentation, tell people something. It's a subtle linguistic difference, but in terms of your performance, it is absolutely massive. Moving on from that, there's another issue that comes up time and time again, and that is that people are a bit bored with their own content. And particularly if you're delivering the same chapters again and again. Oh, that cred slide. Yeah, let's do the cred slide second because it's in the deck. And the danger is that you deliver it in a way that is almost, I know you know this, and it really shows in your intonation. And it's a bit like the problem that occurs if you don't do proper eye contact. So, just before you get up or lean in to speak, I'd like you to remember something else. and possibly even say this to you, because again, it's about establishing habits, and that is, they've never heard it before. You may have spent 90 hours with your team thrashing out this content, and you're absolutely sick to death of these ideas, but for them, it's the first time. And that also will have an impact on your intonation. My husband's a travel writer, and he, when he launches a book, and he's in the year when he's publicising it, he goes and gives a whole lot of talks, and it's the same talk every time. And actually, if he drops dead, I can give it, so that's good. And I'm usually there, and as he gets up to speak, as he's walking away, I always say to him, they've never heard it before, they've never heard it before, they've never heard it before. Because I've heard him deliver a presentation instead of telling people something, because he's pretty bored of saying the same thing over and over again. It's a bit like when you do a rehearsal and then you do the real thing immediately afterwards. You can't remember if you said it in the rehearsal or if you've just said it in the real thing. I did this in a live program the other day. We only had 4 minutes between the rehearsal and the real thing. And I kept thinking, I'm sure I've just said that. No, it wasn't. It was in the rehearsal. So it's about remembering. It's the first time for them. The final point I'd like to share with you about the actual performance, going right back to the skiing analogy. No presentation will ever be perfect. There's always going to be a low patch. There's always going to be something that doesn't go according to plan. And it's a bit like when you're skiing down whatever colour runs you ski down, if indeed you ski, and you hit that patch of ice. And, you know, the pole goes down and it's kind of shit, and you don't think it's ever going to end, but actually it does, and you hit the soft ice again, and you're fine, and control is regained. The same thing will happen in practically every presentation you ever do. And the thing to remember is, it's only a patch of ice, I will recover, I will regain my composure, and really importantly, they don't care. And they don't know. And one of the clips that we're going to send you, so we're going to send you the Reagan one. The other one is a guy called Simon Sinek, who's a business guru, nodding heads. And there's a presentation of his that I've watched, and 7 minutes, 45 seconds in, I know that because I've written it many times, he loses it. He clearly loses his train of thought. And there's a moment when it's, you know, slightly awkward, and then he picks up and carries on. And it's a brilliant example of somebody losing it, but regrouping, finding the soft snow again, carrying on, and because he's so engaged and so passionate with his content, and so are we just don't care. And of course, we don't know what he left out, because we never saw the original presentation written down. He might have fast-forwarded to what he was going to do at the end, and then he had to regroup later on, or he might have left out a huge chunk. Nobody else knows, and they certainly don't care. So please don't panic when you have when you hit the patch of ice. So the jus, hopefully not stuck to the bottom of the pan, is done. So I hope in this very short session that I've been able to give you a few very practical hints and tips which will help you to form these habits which will lead to more confidence and more effective presentations. And I hope I've also given you some bigger food for bigger ideas, food for thought, things to go away and consider, like the music, which really is quite sort of masterclassy. What I'm slightly frustrated about is that I've not been able to work with you as individuals, which is what obviously I do in a longer session. So to tease out what your individual strengths and weaknesses are and give you a set of individual strategies for improvement. But I hope you've been able to take away something useful. And maybe now in our Q&A, if there's anything, an individual issue you'd like to raise, to do with presenting, obviously, then perhaps we could cover that now. We've got about 10 minutes left, have we, for questions? Excellent. Hello.
Tips for sort of advising when you get thrown an awkward question.
So first of all, do you, in your 90 hours, 10 minutes preparation, anticipate what the most awkward question might be in your team?
Do I?
Yeah, no. So let's make that a habit from now on. So in the wider team, say to them, what's the most difficult question this client or potential client might ask? gather all of those in and then rehearse them. Get somebody to literally lob that question at you. Do the answer off the top of your head first time, then analyse what you said and how it could have been improved, have another go, maybe rehearse it twice. So that should give you the confidence that you've got answers to really the nastiest, the areas that you feel most exposed on. This is a very big issue. If you get a question that you don't know the answer to, it's difficult, isn't it? If it's not going to expose you as a fraud, purporting to be an expert in your field, I believe there is absolutely nothing wrong with saying, if it's a factual thing, I don't know the answer to that question, but, and the crucial thing is, I'll get the answer this afternoon and I'll call you with it, we can talk about it, or I'll email it to you. If it's a question that has put you on the spot, but which you think you can answer if you've got a little bit of time to think about it, because a lot of people worry that they're not quick thinkers and actually they need time to reflect, then you can do the old sort of media training trick, which is to buy some time with a bit of waffle. So you can do the, oh, yes, that's a really good question. And you know, we in our team have spent a lot of time thinking about that. And it's very similar to an issue that came up with another client actually a couple of years ago. You might have seen the work that we did for client A, and they had a similar issue, and this is what we did. This is all waffle. But it's actually serving a purpose too, because it's showing your credentials, it's a case study, it's mentioning a big client. Always try and do that whenever you can in answering a question. And by the time you've told the anecdote about client A and the similar issue that they had, either you've thought of a decent answer or somebody else in the team has. And you need to get comfortable with the idea that then somebody else goes, oh yes, that was really interesting, wasn't it? And so sorry, in answer to your question, what we would recommend in this case is, I think there's two ways of approaching it. Hello.
Yeah, quick tips for hostile managing physical environment.
Oh yeah.
Especially you horrible rooms you've had to do.
Well, yeah, I mean, the crucial thing is getting to see the room in advance, isn't it? That's in itself a difficult thing. And somebody I worked with the other day, I said, you know, do you get in and choreograph the space and so on? And they went, no. Well, it was a third party space. It wasn't the client's. And I said, and did you ask to go and see it? And they went, oh no, we didn't think of that. So presumably you're all more sophisticated and you are all doing that. It's difficult to say off the top of my head because I don't know who the client is or what the pitch is about. In fact, Camilla and Mark, you're very good at talking about environment and physical. Yeah. Do you want to?
I mean, I think the thing really is the whole way through the pitch, before you go to the work, what you're trying to demonstrate is that you're able to take control of not only the brief, but of their needs and the environment around them. So, you know, some agencies, I think, do well by recognising that, especially if you're going to go off-site, is to suggest a third-party venue and take control of the space. Because once you've got control of it, it's one of these smaller things within the presentation, that once you've got control of it, you get the confidence and you can actually work it very well indeed. And I mean, Amy at MEC used to do a lot of work where they used to produce the pitches in environments and had a production team that went looking, found venues and created the right environment for the team. Made a huge difference. I mean, MEC, one of the best teaching agencies in town, and one of the things I think that did that was they took control of the environment. If you can't take control of it, and it is on the client set, I mean, I certainly wouldn't want to present particularly with people that I cared about in an environment where I hadn't at least seen it at least the day before. And there's good value in it. That when you go and see the venue, you're often shown around by someone who isn't necessarily connected to the client team, and will tell you who else has been there, if they've had any similar questions, if you've got any specific requirements, you can then make them so you look as if you're pretty prepared. So there's lots of advantages from an extra half an hour's worth of ready time.
What's the definition of a hostile environment? What have you experienced?
Client room where you're the third agency in, you just funneled in, and the audience is already sitting there. Yeah. And you've got to set up. Yeah. And
but you don't.
I'm sure we'll be there, and it's.
You don't allow that to happen. You know, if you've been given an hour or 2 hours, you know, say we're going to start the presentation, 10 minutes in, get them out of the room and ask for the 10 minutes to set up. They get out, walk around, have a comfort break, you know, and move around. You can then change the dynamic of the room so they're not anchored in the last 2 presentations. You take control of the environment. When they come back in, you've owned it. So, I mean, it's your time. It's up to you how you use the time.
Control again, control of the things you can. And of course that could be the point of difference, because interestingly I was once on the receiving end of 4 PR pitches back to back in a day. I was helping a client choose an agency, and even though I come from the business, at the end of the day we had the 4 blue documents in front of us. We could not remember who was who. It was really, really interesting. We could remember one because there was somebody wearing a really nasty red shirt that was too tight. That was a point of difference, but for all the wrong reasons. But you know, this is where your raised eyebrow moments and the way you choreograph the piece is coming to play, isn't it? It's that point of difference.
On that kind of point as well, if you're presenting and you're pitching and the client has got a day where they're receiving pitches from various agencies, would you say it's best to be in there 9 o'clock first off presenting, or do you think that it makes any difference?
Well, you don't have a choice, do you, usually? So if you do have a choice. What's your view on that, Mark?
I think you've got 2 benefits. I mean, one is you've obviously got primacy if you go first, so you can actually set the benchmark, and you can set a standard which others have to follow. And I think some agencies are extraordinarily good at making it very difficult to overcome that. The alternative to that, I think, is recency, so you actually go to be the last. But I think the most important thing is, and you're on the right track, which is if you're first, second, third, fourth, you know, at least have a point of view as to what would change in your presentation, because it's considering the audience's level of sophistication, understanding of the brief, how they're physically going to feel at different stages. So I like to go last, I like to go fourth, because I think it's a position that I know how to pitch well from, and by just taking the extra half an hour to say, I know you know the brief and you know all the details, we've summarised it, done all the work, and we've just bought ourselves another 30 minutes to talk about more important things than just regurgitating the brief to them. The other insight you've got is if you go first and you're consistently being put first, particularly by intermediaries, there's a very good reason for that, which is you're the safe pair of hands. So you now know your position in the pitch. Because no one's going to put a wild card on the first hour and everyone come away with the jitters. Always the first person on, normally if the client's got a choice, the people they think are a reliable, solid job.
But that's an interesting point, isn't it, as well, safe pair of hands. That's about analysing what your role, if you like, is in the pitch process. You're the safe pair of hands, agency B are the highly creative one, C are the wild card and whatever. So how are they likely to be presenting to the client based on what their understanding of that too? So how are you going to make your point of difference? Maybe you don't want to be the safe pair of hands. Maybe you want it. Maybe if you think they think you're the safe pair of hands, you need to surprise them by being even more creative or even more innovative in the way you present. Raised eyebrows. You can't reinvent the wheel. Why can't you slightly reinvent the wheel based on the audience that you're in front of that day? Because every audience is slightly different. So if you begin with, who's my fresh meat today, and what are they interested in? Are they interested in that I'm creative, that I'm cheap, that I'm small, big, whatever? Analysing the audience at the beginning of the process will help you to tweak, okay, not reinvent, but tweak maybe the order that you talk to them about your business. Maybe you start with a case study. Maybe you engage them immediately with a piece of work that you've just completed that you think is relevant to them. But it's also part of the big cat. It's being comfortable with the idea that now I am big cat and I am performing. I am me, but the spotlight's on and I've got to deliver. Is that helpful? Yeah. Share. I think name it with your colleagues. Say that you're slightly embarrassed that you're going to be saying the same old again, and they'll go, "Oh no, it's great. You're great. We love listening to it." I bet they will. And do slightly reinvent the wheel each time according to the audience.
Jayne, I've got a question coming through the live screening, which is, I know I should rehearse. I don't at the moment, and time is always the issue. How can I use my time efficiently and rehearse properly?
Oh yeah. Who here rehearses in a way that they think is proper? Sometimes, yeah. Rehearsal is all part of the control thing. And of course, it's a habit that I would so encourage you to get into. What rehearsal delivers for you is getting comfortable with the silences. Who also hates the sound of their own voice in an empty room? Yeah, a few hands. It's hideous, isn't it? It's awful. It's really... But you can get more comfortable with it, and rehearsal will really help. What does rehearsal mean? It means not, then I'll do that, and then I'll do a bit of that, and then I'll talk a few minutes, and then you're going to do that slide, aren't you? Yeah, and then I'll do that. That's not rehearsal. That's a sort of rough run-through. Rehearsal should be performance level, big cat, out loud, in real time. Because how else are you ever going to know how long it is? And I guarantee the first time you rehearse properly out loud, being big cat, it will be at least 30% too long. And you'll have to get in with the red pen. Otherwise, you'll find yourself delivering double the content in half the time. And the other reason that rehearsal is really important is it gets you comfortable with the idea that it comes out differently every time. So, back to our chapters. Let's say that you rehearse the chapter, your credentials chapter. And the first time it will come out with a certain form of words, and the second rehearsal a slightly different form of words. And people can get very hung up about that. They want it to be word perfect. It's almost like they've written a script and learnt it, which of course is a disaster and should never be done. If you get comfortable with the idea that it comes out in a very conversational way, that will make you more real when you do it in the real thing. And rehearsal really is the only way to get comfortable with that. So I think it helps on many, many levels. What you can also do, if you've got chapters, is you can rehearse individual chapters when you've got a few minutes with a stopwatch. So invest in a stopwatch. For this, I've got all my chapters, and I timed them with a stopwatch day before yesterday, each chapter, because I kept being interrupted with emails and whatever. So I know that opening one, that Gettysburg, that took me 10 seconds. The PowerPoint one was minutes. The PowerPoint one was 5 minutes, added it all together and it was fine, then did a full rehearsal and it was within time. So it doesn't have to be rehearsing all of it, all in one go. Rehearse individual chapters. Hello.
Hi. I wondered if you had any tips for somebody who finds himself in a presentation where there's a very dominant person. So something I've seen in pitch presentations is that the CEO feels that they have to say everything and interrupts people and overacts people. I wonder if you have any tips for people who find themselves in that situation.
That's very difficult, isn't it? Even before you get in the room. And I've heard people say that they can't rehearse and they can't prepare because the CEO won't tell them what slides they're doing. And they just get handed some slides that they've never seen before in the taxi on the way there. So I would suggest that actually the solution to that begins before the presentation. And that however junior you are, you try to engage with this very senior dominant person or her or his secretary or assistant or whatever, to try to take a little bit of control over your bits. That obviously will show you in a very good light as well, because it shows that you're being proactive and you're being very professional and that you want to really contribute to the success of the pitch. So it's about asking, what bits am I going to be doing? I'd like to rehearse. And asking questions like who's handing over to me and who am I handing over to, and some of the practicalities, so that you at least know what to expect. Knowing what to expect is a great thing. Being surprised on the day is a very bad thing. But I think during the presentation, if your very dominant but probably rather brilliant boss wants to hold forth, I think you've got to let them if you're junior. You can't interrupt them. And I don't think you can do the thing of butting in, because I think that would look bad and present a bad image to the client.
Can I ask about body language? I find a lot of presentations, especially when they're one-on-one or two-on-one, when you've met for the first time, I end up mirroring what they're doing. So if they put their arm on the chair, my arm on my chair, naturally.
Yes.
And I'm very conscious of that, but it's a kind of subconscious thing.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if they would pick that up or not.
People who are experts in these things acknowledge that. It's very common. And it's meant to be a really good thing because it's meant to create, you know, a lot of what you're doing in these situations is trying to create a connection, because a connection will enable you to engage and resonate and persuade. And if that is a very subtle way, you're not doing it consciously, of doing that, then it can only be a good thing. Whilst always, of course, remaining true to your brand values. What are your brand values, out of interest?
I put knowledgeable because, and I say to my team, is nobody knows the business or what we're trying to do better than you do.
Yeah.
So don't be frightened of that.
Yeah.
Whatever you say with confidence, who's going to knock it down?
Yeah, yeah.
And it's that confidence thing and knowledge, but I think also there's a bit about passion and theatre really, and also trying to get that kind of point of difference. Wow, how do you stand out from the red shirt?
Yeah.
The rest of the crowd.
Yeah, that's a really good point you've raised there, actually, about knowledge, because people often say to me, oh, but the client knows more about their business. Of course the client knows more about their business. They're in it day to day, but you know about your business. And that's what you need to focus on. And I think there's a very interesting way of looking at the relationship between you and the client or the potential client, and that is that you are a mentor. People often, I think, when they're selling, we're all persuading or selling most of the time, ideas or whatever, I think you can feel that you're on the spot and they're judging you, and if you're a consultant, it's about, I'm paying you, what am I getting for my money? Now, that may not be what is being sent in your direction, but it's what a lot of people feel. And I worked with somebody the other day, and we came to this idea of you are their mentor. You have really valuable knowledge that you're sharing with them, and they are going to be grateful for that. And I think that's a really nice way of diffusing sometimes some of the anxiety about them judging you and pointing the finger at you, and come on then, you know, show us what you know, tell us why we should give you the business. It's part of that journey from you needing them to them needing you. You've got something that is of genuine interest to them. You're not selling, you're sharing.
Well, I had a pitch recently where the guy said, I've heard it all before.
Oh.
I've seen it all before.
Nice.
I've seen every presentation, you've got 10 minutes. And that was his opening gambit.
Tosser, you might say. How long did you think you had?
I think we planned for an hour.
Right, so now one of the habits you're going to get into going forwards is, what if that happens again? And what do we do in the 10 minutes?
We ended up an hour and a half.
Oh, yes.
So, because it was basically breaking down the barriers and having a conversation.
Yeah.
So, and going through the examples and trying to get them engaged.
Yeah.
And then you look at it, and actually it was an hour and a half.
Yeah.
So, but that's how it started off. That was quite tough.
Yeah.
Well, I think we're probably close to time
Yes,
up. And I just
yes.
came here and I was trying to think about all the things Jayne has said, and I'm under no pressure to do a very good close here until I see right in front of me
a pair of pants.
A pair of pants and a bird. So that probably didn't go quite as well as planned, according to what you've been saying, but just mainly to say thank you so much to Jayne. It's so professional. I won't say you're slick, incredibly professional, engaging, and some things that hopefully we can all take back to make a real difference in our agency. And thank you, Jayne.